Welcome back to Call Time with Katie Birnbaum. Thanks as always for your viewership and support. I've loved getting to chat with some of theater's best and brightest and connect with an audience. And one of my favorite things about doing the show has been the broad range of guests I've been able to have. You know, we have a chorus dancer one day and a designer the next. So based on that, you may be able to guess that my next guest, today's guest, is an amazing Tony-winning scenic designer, one of the most highly esteemed on Broadway. And I'm so excited because his work, what he does, couldn't be more different from what I do in the theater. I'm so excited to discuss it and get into all of the nitty-gritty. So welcome, Beowulf Boritt. Thanks for being here.
Hi, I think I'm blushing now after that introduction. Thank you.
Well, I'm not even done because I'm going to do a full intro of most of your credits next. But first of all, it is Beowulf, like the mythological.
Yeah, like the poem. Yep.
Okay, amazing.
And the answer is that there is no good excuse for that either. My father is Hungarian, and I think he didn't have a very good grasp of American names. And my mother's family is Scandinavian. If you go back about 4 generations, so that's the closest I've got to an excuse. But it's just the name I got stuck with as a kid, and it's worked out okay as an adult.
Well, it definitely sticks in your mind. I'm sure there was no one else in your class with your name.
There was not. There was not.
Well, as I said, before we get into questions and everything, I'm going to do a brief introduction, so you may be blushing even more. He's the son of esteemed Civil War scholar and Hungarian refugee and revolutionary, Gábor Boritt. They moved around a lot before settling in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where he was inspired by his grandmother's artistic ambitions to begin painting and creating on his own. After he received a BA from Vassar College in literature, which interestingly enough, I'm sure we'll get to, I'm also a former English major, liberal arts college person who ended up in the theater, so I'm sure we'll talk about that. He then got his MFA in scenic design from NYU before being asked by Hal Prince to design the set for the original off-Broadway production of the last 5 years. Since then, he's gone on to design the sets for over 20 Broadway shows, including Freestyle Love Supreme, On the Town, Hand to God, Sondheim on Sondheim, Spelling Bee, Meteor Shower, Prince of Broadway, Bronx Tale, Rock of Ages, and Come From Away. He's won a Tony for his design for James Lapine's Act 1 and his designs for the Scottsboro Boys and Therese Raquin, I hope I'm saying the French correctly, have been Tony nominated. And in addition to all of his work on Broadway, Beowulf has worked extensively off-Broadway, regionally, and in Europe and Asia, receiving the 2007 Obie Award for Sustained Excellence in Design. And he's also designed sets for opera, dance, television, and even the circus. I would certainly describe Beowulf as one of the most prolific designers we have in the 21st century American theater, but I don't have to describe him at all because apparently Mel Brooks has already said it all by labeling him as a genius guy who does crazy sets. So first of all, I have to ask, like, how did that quote come about? Because obviously it stuck out to me on your website.
Yeah. I've worked with Susan Stroman a lot, and about 5 years ago, maybe, Mel and Stro wanted to revamp Young Frankenstein and do it in London. They'd done it in New York, and it was a huge production, and it didn't run as long as they would have liked it to. And so they had the idea of, let's try to make it a smaller, kind of leaner musical, and they asked me to do it. And I think actually Tom Meehan might have been the link in all of that. I had just done a tour of Annie that Tom was involved in, and he thought, oh, this guy knows how to do like a simple touring set. Maybe that's the right person to kind of do a simpler version of Young Frankenstein. And so I spent a couple of years working with Stro and Mel, and when I first watched the video of the Broadway production, what struck me very early on is actually at its heart, it is kind of a vaudeville show. When Igor comes out and they do that Together Again for the First Time number, I thought that's just a vaudeville in one, like two guys in spotlights, a hat and cane number. And we could do the whole show like it's a vaudeville show with just 2-dimensional drops. It's a lot of locations, but if you do it all with painted drops, it's kind of charming and old school, and also has the advantage of being very economical.
Right.
And so we did a production that way, and in the course of developing it, I Mel had got interviewed by Playbill, and he was just talking about it as we were developing the designs, and he said that, and somebody sent it to me, and I thought, oh my God, I can't, you can't beat Mel Brooks calling you a crazy genius. So I don't know that it's true, but it's nice that he said it.
It's the perfect pull quote, and like such a funny button to end your description on. I love it.
Yeah.
And I'm obsessed with Mel Brooks, so cool that you have that to.
It was very cool to get. He's one of those people that, you know, when you have the opportunity to work with a legend like that, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I've been very lucky and worked with a number of legendary entertainers, but
I was gonna say.
but Mel is certainly up there.
For sure. Well, let's start from the beginning. I want to start with how it all began in your childhood. I was reading on your website, or somewhere, it said that your mom was an aspiring opera singer, but really your grandmothers who inspired you. And I think it's so interesting, you know, your father is this Civil War scholar and you're doing something totally different. So I'm curious how that interest developed.
Yeah, I think I was always I liked to draw. When I was a kid, when I was quite young, my father read me The Lord of the Rings, and I took to sort of illustrating it every day. Whatever chapter we read, I would draw a picture of it. And my parents were great, and pretty soon our kitchen was just full of my illustrations, my 10-year-old illustrations of The Lord of the Rings. And I used to make little, almost like set models, honestly. I would get like my Playmobil figures or little toys and make little dioramas in the bookshelves in our dining room of The Lord of the Rings. And I think that really is kind of the heart of me wanting to kind of make little physical worlds of storytelling. But my mother used to sing in the chorus of the Memphis Opera. When I was a little kid, we lived in Memphis. And that was my first exposure to live theater. She'd take me to the dress rehearsal sometimes and let me watch. And I don't know that I was that interested in the opera, but I remember vividly the first time I saw a set change. We were sitting in intermission, and I think it was Verdi's Macbeth, and the set was this kind of big Stonehenge-looking thing. And this stagehand came walking out on stage and like pushed this enormous boulder that was 20 feet tall across the stage. And I think I was just like gobsmacked. I didn't know what I was seeing. But it was the first time I sort of understood that there's like a fake world that looks like a real world, and that thing. I remember it quite vividly. I was probably 7 or 8 when that happened. But I think, owe a huge amount to my grandmother, who was, she lived on a farm up in New England, and we would go there almost every summer when I was a kid. And she just encouraged me, whatever kind of artistic impulse I had, she encouraged me. She bought me oil paints when I was young, and she was a wonderful gardener, and she sort of lived in this kind of beautiful fairy tale house with a beautiful garden around it. She had studied set design when she was in college at Wellesley in the 1930s. She never pursued it, but she did design some sets, and she did some kind of window dressing in the 30s when she got out of college. And then, given the time that it was, I think women weren't supposed to have jobs, so she got married and settled down and had children. But she when she was quite young, she actually lived down the street from Andrew Wyeth, and she used to paint with him. They would go out. It was before he was Andrew Wyeth. He was obviously a wonderful painter, but he wasn't famous yet. And so they were friends many, many years ago. So that she was a huge influence in that way, just sort of in believing in the power of art and really loving it and encouraging me to be artistic. And I owe a lot to my parents also for being encouraging. My father was a writer. My mother had been a performer. And they always encouraged me just to, whatever sort of artistic impulse I had, they were encouraging rather than saying, no, you need to do something that'll make a living. And when I wanted to become a theater major in college, they again were encouraging. They basically said, if you find something you love doing, then you'll find a way to make a living doing it. And so that's what I did, and thank God it turned out to be true that I've been able to make a living doing it.
So interesting you mentioned this like moment that changed you and sort of made you want to do what you do, being a set change, because as an actor and a director, I think of set changes as some of the most frustrating moments in a show because they're so hard to get right. But you're right that when they work, it's like magic. What do you think drew you to that moment in particular? Is it the like solving a problem kind of thing?
I think it was honestly that I thought it was a giant boulder and one man was clearly moving it. So it was I don't know that was meant even to be a theatrical thing, but it was, I think my little 7-year-old brain was trying to like compute what was happening in front of me because it didn't
Right.
like it seemed to be defying the laws of physics. And I think in a way that is something that in the most kind of beautiful of Broadway musical set changes is what happens. Is the whole world kind of turns inside out in some magical way that shouldn't be able to happen, and yet you're watching it happen in front of you. And it's I feel like it's a discussion I have a lot with directors these days because video is now so prevalent, and you can kind of do anything in video. But
Right.
every time someone suggests kind of a video trick to solve something on stage, I push against it because we're all used to seeing incredible special effects in movies, and you put that on stage and it's just a movie special effect on stage. It's not that surprising. We're all kind of aware that there's some kind of computer digital effect that's making it happen.
Yeah.
But if you can take the physical thing and make it do some kind of a trick in front of you, that's, I think, much more interesting because you know that you probably know it's a trick, but you know that this physical object is transforming or turning upside down or spinning around or whatever's happening, but you know it's actually happening in front of you, that it's seeming to defy physics in some way. And that's kind of magic, much more than it, to my mind anyway, much more than a digital effect that's happening on top of it.
Yeah, and it's totally unique to live theater. You're seeing the inside and the outside at the same time, which is so cool. But it also makes me think of I was thinking about scenic design, and I think it's so interesting because to me, it seems like a cool combination of sort of math, like architecture, like how does this piece of art actually function? And then the creative side of it, like how does this look? How do we build this world? Do you think that it's sort of a 50-50 relationship between those two things, or is there one more than the other? How do you view it?
I think that those two halves of it are very true. There's the artistic impulse, the storytelling part of it, and that honestly is the most interesting to me. It's trying to find, conceptually what is it about the story we're trying to tell that I can express in a visual way that, sometimes it's just information that we need to know we're in the kitchen or we're in the street or wherever we are. But more interesting than that is how do I take those locations or wherever it is we're going to set the piece and build them in such a way that they're thematically supporting the story or helping, explain the story or enhance it or whatever it is for that particular show. But then, yeah, there is the sort of more mechanical part of it that once I have that idea and how I want to express it, we have to physically make the thing. And it's the architecture part of it, the geometry of it. In a musical, it's massive numbers of things kind of moving past each other in relatively small spaces. And it's kind of like a giant game of Jenga or Tetris or something where you're trying to cram all this stuff into a small space. And in general, things are passing each other with very tight tolerances, and it all has to be designed to work that way. I'm in the midst of it right now up in the park. We're just about to do Merry Wives, and it's a relatively musical comedy set for a Shakespeare play. And the tech director was just saying that I don't think I've ever seen anybody cram quite so much into a 20-foot turntable before, because we're trying to make it do a lot of things in a small space. But it's those two things hand in hand are both important. If you don't have a good idea and you're not kind of creating a good image, all of the mechanical part of it is not worth much. But if you can't handle the mechanical end of it, then you actually can't get from place to place and make those things work.
You've talked before in other interviews and things about your concept of how you do design your process, that it's based on one strong idea. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means to you and how it guides your process?
Yeah, I think it's interesting is that the longer I've done this, I do try to always do that. I think sometimes I veer away from it. I think I've gotten a little less rigid as I've gotten older and found there's, a lot of ways to skin a cat. But I do think it does come down to wanting the set to be simple in a way that I don't want to, if you throw too many ideas at an audience, they're not gonna be able to follow it. There's a great Steve Sondheim quote where he's talking about lyrics and saying that lyrics can't be too dense because there's so much coming at the audience. He says, you've got costumes, you've got lighting, you've got choreography, you've got all of this happening all at once. And if the lyric gets too dense, they're just not going to follow it. Now, Hamilton might put the lie to that statement, but even there, the important points they hammer home, you have to accept that any one thing is only getting a fraction of the audience's attention. And maybe for a split second, the set can take center stage and it does something that everyone's paying attention to. but basically every piece is sort of part of a symphony telling whatever story that it is. And so if I want the set to make some kind of a statement, I think it has to be one kind of simple, very clear idea that I'm driving at with everything, so that that idea is able to kind of come through. Um, an example of that, I think, is when I did Act One, which is, in some ways it was an enormous set with an immense amount of detail and a lot going on in it. But the impetus for that set was really two things. And most important was early on, when James Lapine and I were talking about it, he said it's a story about a young man trying to break into the theater. And I want it to be the exuberance and the energy of youth. When you're 20 years old, you're trying to get your first job, you're dashing up and down stairs, banging on doors, trying to get that door to open so you get that first job. And that, when he said that to me, that really was the impetus for that set. It was just nothing but staircases and doors and in this, immense labyrinth that turned in front of you. But hand in hand with that was each of the locations in that set, even though it was an enormous set, each of the locations was quite small and usually didn't have very much in them. There usually was not much more than a door and a window and a table and a typewriter, and a couple of things. It was, what are the couple of things I need in this scene to tell us where we are and to let the action of that scene play out. And it turned into an enormous set because there were 35 locations and they came at us in very quick succession. And so it was kind of in constant motion. You were running from one place to the next with a lot of movement. And you didn't stop in any of the places very long. And so again, they didn't need to have an immense amount in them because your eye could only rest there briefly, and then the action was off to the next location. And so it's that balance of what is the pace that we're going to be moving through the world of the physical world of the play, and how can I use that pacing of the course of the play and the elements at my disposal to sort of bring that one strong idea in that case, this sort of world of New York that a young man is racing through, trying to explore and battle his way into. I started recently to talk a lot about set design as the transformation of space over time. You have a volume of space and you have 90 minutes or 2 hours, whatever it is, that you're going to be living within that space, and that a bunch of actors are going to be living and moving within that space. And if it is a set that is going to be changing and transforming, the pace of that transformation needs to be in sync with the rhythm of the writing and the rhythm of the directing of the show, so that the pieces are all working together to tell that same story. And in fact, next year I'm publishing a book called Transforming Space Over Time. And I'm just sort of in the final stages with the publisher getting things sorted out. But I take 6 shows that I've done and kind of talk about the process in each one of them and how I figured it out with the director and then how we executed the design. But it is, how does the sort of the physical transformation of this sculpture that is a set, how does it help tell the story, and how does it help kind of center the actors and make them the most important thing as the story is playing out? And how do you read a script and figure out, from this scene to this scene, I don't want I don't want you to notice the set's there at all. I want to get from one place to the other as seamlessly as possible. But then at another point in the show, and Act One is a good example of this, we went through probably, 35 minutes of that play in quick succession, scene after scene after scene, where every location came after the next one very quickly, got you from place to place to place. And then there was a moment where Mosshart's first play is a disaster, and it closes, and he has to go home and go back and live in this awful tenement with his parents, and he's upset. And the script kind of takes a pause in that moment. You've been racing through this trajectory, and suddenly there's like a breath where the story pauses and resets. And in that moment, we took this whole massive set and did a massive 180-degree turn with it. And you saw Santino Fontano kind of slowly, dejectedly weaving his way through the set as he goes back home again. And there were no lines, there was no action. It was just him kind of in dim light moving back through this world that we'd seen him working his way through. And it remains one of my favorite scene changes I ever did, because it was really kind of syncing the physical structure with the written structure very, very tightly, and making the two kind of work hand in hand. And I think it's something that we were able to do in that show because James was writing and directing, so he could pull the strings in both departments. But he's also such a visual guy that we really kind of constructed that set as he was constructing the script, and kind of very carefully laid out how the architecture was going to work in conjunction with the script, so that we could do those things.
Well, first of all, I'm so thrilled that my show is getting the hot goss that about your book. What 6 shows are you focusing on for your book?
It is Act One and the Scottsboro Boys and the Much Ado in the Park that I did with Kenny Leon, and Prince of Broadway with Hal Prince, Meteor Shower with Jerry Zaks, and Sondheim on Sondheim. And so it's those 6 shows, and then there's an interview with the director of each of the shows where we kind of talk about both that show, but more often actually with their design process with other designers. And with James, we talk a lot about Sunday in the Park with George. With Hal, it's a very wide-ranging interview talking about a lot of different people. But and then the very capper of it is I interview Sondheim about design, and he starts off saying, "I'm a composer. I've got nothing to say about design." And then we talk for an hour about his ideas on what all these shows should have looked like, as opposed to what they did look like.
Of course, I'm sure he had stuff to say. That's amazing. I can't wait to read it when it comes out. But it also reminds me of process, which is, I mean, talk to me as if I have no idea, because I kind of do have no idea. How do your ideas come from your mind to ultimately be on the stage? And because I've done directing work, I know that your partner in crime is sort of the director, I would say, but I'm curious for your thoughts on that too.
No, absolutely. The director is absolutely, that is the collaboration. I mean, we were all collaborating with each other, but that's why my book has all these interviews with the directors, because for me, that is a good relationship there is everything. If we're working well together, we're going to come up with a set that kind of helps define the production in a way that neither of us would have come up on our own. It's always going to be something that the two people kind of, the ideas sparking off each other will develop something that I couldn't have come up with and that director wouldn't have come up with without me. And hopefully it makes the entire production richer and more interesting because of that. And in a funny way, that question about process is kind of what sparked the book, because I get asked that a lot. And I was never able to answer it. I'm not sure the book answers it. I don't have any single way of doing it. I sit down and read the script is really the first thing I always do. Occasionally I will do a play that doesn't have a script, like Freestyle Love Supreme, but almost everything I do is kind of literature based. And at its heart, I think that is what theater is. It's literature, being presented. It is words that somebody has written that an actor is speaking. And that's theater, and an audience is listening, and that's all you really need. So everything else you're doing is just to enhance that experience and try to make that better. And to some degree, I think a set designer's job is I guess like a doctor, first do no harm, and don't do things that are going to get in the way of that. Try to do things that will enhance that. But at my best, I'm hoping that I can enhance that, and and do things that make that experience and those words and those actors living out that story richer and more interesting. And the way to do that is through this intense collaboration with a director. So I read the script, and then I, really before I do anything else, I will sit down with the director because I want to get their response. Anything that I'm doing, sorry, there's a helicopter coming over us. Can you hear that, or is it okay?
I did, but it's fine. I mean, that's New York. We've had sirens, we've had people's children coming in. It's
excellent. Excellent. Of course, he's decided to hover right over my building right now, but so I'll sit down really before I've even thought about it too much. I try to sit down, read the script straight through if I can, and I don't take notes. I just kind of, whatever impressions I have, and then I sit down and talk with the director, and I really want to hear what is their impression of the script. How do they want to approach it? And no, I don't want to know like it should be green or I need 3 doors. Like I don't care about that stuff early on. It's really stuff like where James said it's the story of the energy of youth in the world of theater. Those are the kind of things that will get me started. And if there are specific things the director says I want to try this effect or whatever, I guess I want to know that in a first discussion, but usually it's not about that. It's really kind of a very loose, like what is, in broad strokes, like what are we trying to achieve? What story are we trying to tell? Because 2 different directors are going to approach the same script very differently, and that frankly is what makes my job interesting. And it's another thing I talk about a lot in the book, and it was interesting to explore in the book, that because Lapine is someone who started as a photographer and a graphic designer, he approaches theater very visually, and it leads to things like Sunday in the Park, but it means that as a designer, I can throw kind of a weird set at him that is maybe going to be hard to stage on, but if it's interesting to him visually and the visual story is interesting, he'll be like, yeah, we can do that. I'll stage, I'll figure it out. I mean, Act One was a pain in the ass to stage on. It was a difficult set.
I was going to ask if you like working with directors that have a working knowledge of set design or design in general, or directors that are sort of like, I don't know, I think it's about this, do whatever you want.
I would much rather have someone who's gonna have ideas and throw things at me. I don't want to be told, like, make it look like the Empire State Building, but I don't mind being told, make it feel like the Empire State Building, if that makes sense.
Right.
Give me that energy of New York reaching into the sky. So in James's case, there's one way to approach it. If I'm doing a Stroman show, it's almost always going to be a dance show or something where, movement and people moving is going to be the prime driver of the story. And so that requires a different kind of a set. It requires a floor that will allow tap dance or ballet or whatever it is. Sometimes we do a show where the dances or whatever she's doing isn't so demanding on the dance surface. And then I can, do a plexiglass floor or something like that. But if it's Jerry's acts, there's going to be an awful lot staged right down stage center, right in there, right in your laps. And it's going to be a lot about how does the set support that, and how does the set kind of push everything and center it in that way. So everybody has a different way of doing it. Kenny Leon is going to come at it. He studied political science. He's going to come at it with a kind of a sociological take on the story he's trying to tell, and the set has to help support that. So every director, it's going to be a little different. And the first time out, you don't necessarily know what that is. I often say directing, a designer director is a little bit like dating, and you maybe like the person, you maybe don't like the person, but the first time you go out together, you also don't really know each other, and you're trying to figure all that out. So that's sort of the next step, is once we've had that first meeting, then we go into, like, how does that turn into a set? And that's where I don't have any specific way that I do it. That conversation will spark something, one hopes. And probably there's some research, but maybe then I'm just jumping in and doing sketches. Maybe I'm building a model. I would say that the end result of the design process is 99% of the time with me is a very finished set model, and pretty detailed and pretty intricate. It's really how I design a set. I build them all myself, and I sit there and figure it out that way. And whether we do sketches or workshops or whatever to kind of get to that point, that's going to be when the set kind of settles into concrete in a way, and that's the thing that we then draw up and send off to a scene shop to build and send into the theater. I think on a Broadway show especially, the design, I said it gets set in concrete, and it really kind of does in a way. Before the show has gone into rehearsal, the set has got to be designed and basically finished, because they tend to be so big and take so long to build and put into the theater that it has to be sorted out before the actors are in rehearsal. And you need to leave enough flexibility into it that things can kind of grow and develop. But doing big Broadway shows, you also need a director who's kind of confident enough in their decisions that 3 months before they've started directing the show, they're ready to kind of make decisions on what the world is going to be that are not going to be easy to change later on. And you find places you can be flexible, but there's a lot of places where it kind of gets locked in, and you can change it, but it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to change it, and it becomes difficult to do.
That's brought up so many questions for me. First of all, I definitely think of designers in general when you're doing a show as, especially when you're an actor, as people who sort of show up for tech and then disappear. First of all, are you a person that enjoys tech? Because I feel like tech is sort of a polarizing thing for actors in particular.
Yeah. I think on balance, I actually don't enjoy tech. I think it's long and boring for me too. But what I do enjoy is the moment where something finally comes together. Like when you sit there for 6 hours tinkering with a moment or whatever, and getting the light cue right and getting the automation right and all of those things that take a long time and are boring. And it's as boring for me as it is for the actors. But when you make it work and it actually then is telling the story, and that 5 seconds of theater time is suddenly kind of magic and perfect, and everything is clicking down to the nanosecond, then that's magic. And having to do that in a room full of people in front of a bunch of people is a little tedious. but when it works, I think it's amazing, and I think tech is kind of a necessary evil in that sense. But I will not say that I enjoy it most of the time.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. It's a love-hate relationship, I think, for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Also, though, because you're on this totally different schedule than a lot of other people involved in the production, as you say, you basically have to finish your main idea 3 months before the show starts. It allows you to do so many more shows at any given time in any given year than a director, and especially than an actor.
Yeah.
Do you savor that? Do you love that? Do you ever feel that like your brain is in 8 million different places at once?
Yeah, it's both things. I mean, it certainly exhausts me sometimes. I do between 15 and 20 shows a year most years, and depending on the scale of them, that can be pretty exhausting, and it can just be, the hamster wheel constantly. Um, but I do love the adrenaline of it. I have to say, it's when I get sort of amped up and I am kind of cranking away 80 hours a week, putting up shows here, there, and everywhere. I love it. After 25 years of doing it, I still love that and find it exhilarating and really exciting. And I think the projects kind of play off each other. I think what I'm learning on one show will tend to influence and affect the next one and enhance it in some ways. And looking back at my work, I certainly can see like this is a period I was playing with whatever idea, and all these shows, this like thing is going on that I'm working through or figuring out. I think if somebody were to say, I'll pay you enough money to live on for a year, but you're only going to do this one show for the year, I actually think I would probably overwork it, and I think I wouldn't like it. I mean, I don't know. I've never had that opportunity, so maybe it would be great. But I think I really do sort of like the different things playing off each other and how it keeps it all fresh, because I'm not just kind of pounding away at this one idea over and over again. I'm a little bit here, a little bit there. And I seem to be pretty good at compartmentalizing things and kind of jumping from one project to the next, even in the course of a day. And I certainly will sit in tech for one show, designing the next one. Flying Over Sunset, that is shut down right after a final dress at Lincoln Center and will reopen again this October. But the basic kind of mechanical concept for how that set worked, I figured out sitting backstage at the Delacorte in the scenery hut when it was pouring rain and rehearsal had been canceled. I was sopping wet, had come in with my poncho on, and we had an hour to kill while the thunderstorm passed. And I sat down and started messing with my computer and suddenly figured out how that set could work. So those kind of moments where who knows what it is, it's a sort of a eureka moment where suddenly you're like, no, I've got it. I know what this is. And I just need to like get it down on paper or get it worked into the computer or get it sorted out. But when you get those kind of ideas that burst alive in your head, that is the absolute best moment in theater to me. It is that, again, to quote Lapine and Sunday in the Park, it's that the blank page or canvas moment when you suddenly figure out the thing that you're putting onto that blank page, and it works and it's good. That there's nothing better. And I find at least that it's not something I can make happen. It either happens or it doesn't on a show, and it's no amount of like kind of squeezing or effort or research is going to make it happen. I just have to kind of poke at things or scribble or try to come up with ideas, and then either my brain will fire and something will actually kind of complete itself in my head, or it won't. But when it does, it's magic, and it's just the best.
So is that scary though, sort of knowing like it's either going to happen or it's not, and it could not happen?
It is so frustrating when it's a project that should be really exciting and I just cannot have an inspired idea, and sometimes that happens. I hope I'm sort of competent enough and enough of a craftsman that I can make it look okay and I can solve the problems of the show, but it doesn't always get to let's kind of boiled down simple concept that kind of makes both the physical structure and the emotional world of the play all cohere into a single thing. I keep talking about Act One on this, but it's a show where everything kind of seemed to go right for me. And that set, the night before I had a meeting scheduled with Lapine to show him an idea for the set. And at 5 o'clock the night before the meeting, I thought this idea is not good enough. And the idea kind of, what turned out to be the real set, like assembled itself in my head in 5 seconds. And I stayed up all night and I built a model out of literally what I had lying around, matchsticks and old model pieces. And it was this completely Frankenstein thing that I showed him the next morning, but that was the set. And it was one of those perfect moments where this kind of complicated idea, but I mean, complicated in execution, but simple idea kind of all just hopped together. And I was like, I know what this is and I know how to do it.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And I love the Flying Over Sunset story about coming up with it. Of course, you would work on your other projects while you're sitting in tech. All we do in tech is sit around and laugh and talk. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's why I love it too. You mentioned in your, when you were talking about your process budget and how, you know, if a director is like, actually, we don't want this staircase in the center of the set, that will cost potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in another interview you did, you talked about how you think of it as sort of like one of the major important elements of set design that people forget. So are you actively thinking about budget when you're designing, or is it like a later in the process kind of thought?
It's, it's not, I don't budget my own, I don't deal with my budgets in the sense that I don't think like this is going to take 10 screws and they cost 50 cents each and therefore blah, blah, blah. But over time, I've gotten pretty good at estimating what a set is going to cost. So as I'm designing it, I, not to the penny by any means, but I, say I've got a $50,000 budget or $1 million budget, I will tailor the ideas towards that. And I would say like 85% of the time, I kind of know that I'm aiming about at what the budget is. And I usually come in 10, 20% over because, I'm being a little ambitious for whatever the budget is. And then we have to make some cuts and figure it out. But I figure if I'm coming in close to budget and just a little bit over, then I have estimated about right. It is really more of a gut reaction thing. It's not me carefully sitting down and knowing the cost of 2x4s or anything like that. But occasionally I am way off, and I was once famously 1,000% over budget on a set, and that was a little shocking and upsetting. But we got it sorted out eventually. But usually I'm in the ballpark, and it is really just being able to kind of estimate it roughly in my head.
Well, and the shows you do really run the gamut, because I imagine you've done huge Broadway musicals with what I imagine are huge budgets.
Yeah.
Then you've done much more intimate, sort of smaller plays off Broadway. Is there one that has your heart, or are they just like so different?
They're so different. I mean, the thing I would say is, the thing I love about each of those is I love the kind of speed and immediacy of off-Broadway, and I frankly love being able to get my hands in some paint and and help make part of it. Doing as many shows as I do, I do that less and less. But early in my career, I built all my own scenery, and I love doing it. I love making it. So I love that part of off-Broadway, and I love again sort of the speed of it, because the budgets are less. There's less pressure. You can kind of have an idea and try it out and not feel like it's the end of the world if it was the wrong idea. The flip side is what I love about big Broadway shows is I can have an idea of, let's put a 3-story set on a 60-foot diameter turntable and actually do it. Or I can put a river on stage and have them row a boat through it and drown a guy in that river and then fly a house in on top of it and actually do it. And that makes all of like the hassles and the struggles of Broadway 100% worth it, to be able to have a cockamamie idea and put it on stage and people like it and are happy about it.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It comes with it's very high stakes, which can be nerve-wracking and scary and one small mistake. But on the other hand, go big or go home,
Yeah, it's also, there's a responsibility with it that I do take pretty seriously, that I'm being entrusted with some amount of money, whatever it is. And I don't want to waste that. I don't want to waste the producer's money on something that's not going to work. And it does make it a little nerve-wracking, especially on Broadway, to try out an idea that you're not sure is going to work. But it's also, I think, the responsibility of trying to come in on budget. I am not one of those people who says, this is the design, you need to come up with the money to pay for it. Occasionally that happens, and I'm very grateful when a theater is willing to raise the budget to pay for some idea. But I do feel like genuinely, if I've been told what the budget is, then it is my responsibility to try to stay within that budget and to work within it. That's part of the job of being a professional doing this.
Yeah, no, I think I'm so glad you talk about it, because obviously theater is a business at the end of the day, or for-profit theater.
Yeah.
And people, of course, it's about artistry, but I think sometimes people forget that, you have to pay back the producers at the end.
Do. And honestly, even in the not-for-profit theater where things are a little less stressful and it's, one show not doing well is not going to make the whole theater fold in general, but the money still comes from somewhere. It's donations or whatever it is,
Right.
but it is hard-earned money, however it gets there. And I don't want to waste it. And it comes right down to kind of tech time. You calculate how much you're paying for 15 minutes of time in a Broadway theater with all the people who are there. I think it's something, I don't know, I was on average like $7,000 to $10,000 for every 15 minutes you're in the theater. So if I've screwed up something and we're wasting 15 minutes, I'm like flushing that money down the toilet, and it makes me mad. And I get mad at people who start dithering and wasting that time. It's those moments are precious, and if you don't spend them well, you're throwing money away. And it is money that is hard to come by wherever it came from. So I do try to take all that seriously.
That's probably one of the reasons why you're so beloved by so many producers and directors too, because you take it seriously, which I think is really important. But you've also worked beyond theater, in opera, in dance, even in the circus. I saw it. What is that like? And I assume you think of theater as like your first love that you'll always return to, but what are these other genres like?
Yeah, I mean, it's any kind of live performance like that I have found to be kind of similar. I really have dabbled in those things, so I don't know them as well. I've done more dance than other things, and I love the kind of abstraction of ballet, and the sort of less literalness of it is kind of exciting and something I'm trying to explore. The circus was certainly fascinating for what it was. I mean, to get to go to Tech with a bunch of elephants is fun. It's that is very much its own machine, and it was an interesting experience. I did it a couple of times, and I was grateful for the opportunity. It is very much kind of a commercial enterprise, and but I was glad to do it. It was very interesting. It's not, circus isn't narrative. I think the storytelling aspect of what live theater is really what draws me to it. And so all of the spectacle and splash of the circus is fun, and it's fun as a designer to make those things, but ultimately it is a visual that's tied to a story, and a narrative is what interests me, and it's the thing that I think I'm good at. It's also why I have done a little bit of television and things like that, but in medium that are where the visual is less tied to the narrative, I get lost very quickly as a designer, and I actually just don't know how to do it. It's a weird thing to say, but going into any play, what the show looks like is not of the foremost importance to me. It will become important as we go along, and once we figure out what the idea is, then I want that idea to be expressed and to look good. But I don't go into it thinking, oh, it should be pink or red or this style or whatever, Art Deco. None of that matters to me in the beginning. As we figure out what the story is and how we want to tell it, then those visual choices will start to express that idea in some way, or I'll figure out how can I use these visual things to say something. But initially, it's not important to me what any of those answers are. And I think in a lot of design, that's all they want a designer to do is kind of style. And it's the, in a weird way, the least interesting part of the job to me. It is, what's interesting is how do I put style at the service of narrative and concept.
Before we end with my ending segment, which I will reveal later, I want to ask if you have any advice for aspiring, specifically set designers, but just theatrical designers in general.
Yeah, this is sometimes something I talk about a lot, and I fear I get a little depressing sometimes when I talk about it, because it's just a hard business for anybody. I have been lucky beyond my wildest dreams in this profession, and it's still hard, and I'm still frustrated a lot and struggling. It's a business about connections. You've got to meet as many people as you can and be as decent and good to them as you can, and work as hard as you can so they'll want you to be around. It's when you're young, getting those doors kicked open for the first time is the hardest thing, and you have to keep going at it. I say to people a lot, don't say no to yourself. If you think you want a job, go apply for that job. Try to get it. Try to meet the director. Try to meet somebody who can get you that job. But don't say no to yourself. Don't say, no, they're not going to want me, because a lot of people are going to say no to you, but don't be one of those people saying no to yourself. You have to develop a thick skin so that when you are told no, or when you're told you suck, or whatever it is, you can just like brush it off and go on, because it's going to happen a lot. This business is about a lot of rejection and a lot of heartbreak. But try not to censor yourself and do it to yourself, because plenty of other people are going to do it. So don't, those are two things I would say, and they're both hard things to kind of deal with, and they're not things that I always do myself. There's certainly plenty of times I fail at the things I just said. But I would say the other thing that I've been kind of, I've said all my career, I've been aware of how lucky I am. I think I didn't fully appreciate until this year how much part of that luck is having been born a straight white boy. And that, the people who gave me those opportunities initially were two straight white men. And it's something that I'm more aware of now, and trying to see, like, how can I maybe help twist this business. I've been, my associates are frequently young women, and I have been trying to sort of elevate women in that sense. And I'm now, thinking also, how do I help elevate some non-white people, because there's just this natural human reaction that we are drawn to the thing that is like us, that's familiar to us, and it leads to a business that is a bunch of not all straight white men, but a lot of white men, and frankly, the stories are more interesting if we have a broader canvas. I'm much more interested in seeing a play that is not about me, and I'd love to see a play about a culture I don't know. It's more interesting to me as a designer to work on a play like that. Getting to do Much Ado with Kenny in the Park, where it was a fully black cast and a largely black team, but being one of the white people on that team was eye-opening to me, and really like a wonderful and magical experience. And I think for audiences as well, to see a story told from a perspective that was not maybe the perspective they'd seen a show told from before. So anyway, I've like rambled off onto a different thing now, but it's something that's been on my mind a lot in the past year.
Certainly, as we've been having this moment of reckoning in the theater, which I think is long overdue, there's been a lot of talk about how we do equity in our business. And before I brought you on, I was thinking a lot about how I think it's probably even tougher to be a woman or a person of color trying to be a designer than an actor, even, because there's no like cattle call equivalent when you're a designer. As you say, it really seems to be just like, do you have connections? Who do you know? Is there someone who's going to give you that like lucky break?
Yeah.
And that seems much harder. There's no sort of random chance that maybe you'll be good enough and they'll like pluck you out of obscurity. So I don't know how you create opportunities. I guess it's like things like fellowships, people like you reaching out to more people, creating those connections, but it definitely seems more challenging even than being a performer.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it's, I don't want to talk too much about it because we're still working it out, and there are a number of initiatives happening, but I've been developing something with some other designers and other members of the community to try to help young designers that, even with the best of luck, the first 10 years of a design career are likely to be financially tough. You're doing little shows that take a lot of time and don't pay very much money. And unless you have some other means of support, it's difficult. And so we're trying to figure out a way. It is ultimately, I think, going to be kind of a fellowship or a grant program for young designers to raise money in a way that the Broadway design community is able to kind of help support some young people. I just don't want to talk too much about it because it's sort of in the gestation process right now, but in maybe another 6 months, I think we may get this thing off the ground, because some portion of it is just about money. It's an expensive city to live in, but you kind of have to be here if you want to pursue a theater career. And if there's a way to feed some of the wealth of Broadway into some young, promising people and, help them out even a little bit, maybe it'll do some good.
I think that's great. And I mean, we already got the reveal of your book, so we can wait on
Okay.
the reveal of whatever this is. You did mention though, I briefly before we end, your two, what you called mentors, and is one of them Hal Prince?
Yeah, yeah.
Who's the other?
James Lapine, I would say, the two of them really. I met Hal when I was right out of graduate school, and he ultimately introduced me to his daughter Daisy, which is how I did Last 5 Years, and that was kind of my big first commercial splash. But then I had done Spelling Bee at Barrington Stage, and when they changed directors coming out of that situation, I interviewed with James, and he gave me the job, which he didn't have to do at that point. And some of the people did not continue on with the show, so that really was that 6 months later was on Broadway, and it was a hit show, and it seems obvious, but there is nothing like a hit Broadway show to enhance your career and open up doors. So Hal and James I owe a tremendous amount to, and then that sort of led, that Hal introduced me to Susan Stroman. That's how I ended up doing Scottsboro Boys. That was my first Tony nomination. So it kind of, it feathers out from there, but it's they were all people who gave me a shot when they didn't have to, and I am forever grateful to all of them for giving me those opportunities.
Really, not too shabby mentors to have.
Colossal good luck. I mean, brilliant, smart people, and caring and loving people, and I don't know. Again, I just keep saying luck. I don't know quite how it was that I ended up in the room with all those people. But some part of it was probably perseverance and just knocking on a lot of doors, and those were the ones that happened to open.
Do you think of Spelling Bee as your big break?
It was one of a series of big breaks, but yes, I mean, it was my first Broadway show, and there is definitely a thing that you can't design a Broadway show until you've designed a Broadway show. And so, you need something to click so that you get that first shot at it. And then if that first shot runs for 3 years and everybody sees it, that's even more helpful. So I think that was a big break. Last 5 Years was a big break. In a weird way, a little play called In Betweens that I did in the late 90s, that was my first commercial off-Broadway show, was a big break. It didn't run very long. Peter Marks panned it in the New York Times and it closed. But it was still a commercial off-Broadway show that I could put in my resume, and it kind of gave me some firepower to bang on the doors of off-Broadway theaters and say, hey, look, I did this. You can hire me. You can trust me.
Yeah, no, I think one of the tricky but also great things about what we do is like work begets work. So how do you get that initial work? But once you do one project, I think it's a snowball effect.
Yeah, no, it's certainly the career is never easy, but it does get easier over time, because having done 24 Broadway shows, people think I'm more likely to not squander their money on the 25th.
I think that they're probably right to think that based on our I always end my shows with a segment called the Thank You 5 segment. And it's 5 rapid fire questions that you should answer just the first thing that comes to the top of your head. So the first, a show you've yet to design that you're dying to do.
Oh, Guys and Dolls or West Side Story. It's both of them. It's like the heavy one and the light one, but those two.
Guys and Dolls is my favorite show of all time. I do every couple episodes, I do a special episode on a specific play, and Guys and Dolls is the first one I did.
It is the most perfect piece of light musical comedy. I just love it. It's
perfect, every single aspect. I could go on and on. Favorite 3 sets you've ever designed?
Sondheim on Sondheim is always the one I say is my favorite, if I have to pick one. And this isn't really ranking them. Scottsboro Boys I loved for its simplicity. Act 1 I loved for its complexity. Last 5 Years I loved for its sort of poetic heft, I guess.
Love. Is there a designer, and a scenic designer, could be dead or alive, whom you admire when you think about when you create work?
Yeah, a lot of people, but John Malziner is who I would hold up. He did the original productions of Streetcar and Glass Menagerie and Guys and Dolls, actually. The original Guys and Dolls is his set. I have a couple of his books. I literally was on the phone with his granddaughter earlier today, getting the rights to put some of his work into my book. because it just gets referenced. Hal referenced his work as important to him. Jerry Zaks referenced his work. He is a beautiful, beautiful painter, and if you don't know his work, it's worth looking at just because his renderings are to die for. But he was a set designer and lighting designer, and the way he thinks of light on stage in relation to scenery is amazing. So every theater practitioner should know his work.
Wow, I'll have to check it out. I should say too that I imagine the second most important collaborator to you would be the lighting designer.
No, absolutely. So it's a crucial relationship.
You sort of answered this, but are there any sort of bucket list genres that you've yet to go into, like film or?
Oh, interesting. In a weird way, window dressing. I don't know that I'll ever get the chance to do it. And I'm not even sure I'd be good at it, but I really admire like a good Bloomingdale, a good Saks Fifth Avenue window. I just love them. They're done right. They're so dramatic and so beautiful. There's probably no story involved, and I'm not sure I'd know how to do them. I do admire them, and I'd love a crack at one someday.
I used to go with my mom every, Christmas to see the Saks windows. And now at least they do a narrative from like window to window, like the way you're supposed to go. So maybe Saks will be calling you after they see this.
I hope. Every time I get some kind of slight connection, I poke at it, but I have yet to get that door opened.
I'm sure the call will be forthcoming. And then lastly, I ask a lot of people this, and the answer can be metaphorical or literal, but a set designer essential, like something you couldn't live without in order to do your job.
Honestly, a good director is the honest answer. I think I am not, in a weird way, I'm not organized enough to have any particular process or how I do things. But I need a good director to design with, and I need to be able to build a model. So I guess building a model, those are the two constants to me that I can't do good work without doing those two things.
Wonderful. Your North Stars. Well, that's as a director myself, that's very nice to hear. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Beowulf. Is there anything you think I've missed in your career? Anything you want to say to the?
Oh man, I think I've talked too much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and it's fun. And I could babble on for another hour, but you covered it a lot. We covered a lot.
It's such a pleasure to talk with you, and I always love talking to designers because I mean, they're not unsung, but I think, as I say, when you're an actor, they sort of appear at tech and then disappear, and you don't really know how it seems like magic. How do they do what they do? And so I love pulling back the curtain on that and hearing from you guys. Yeah, no, it is. It's actually one of the tragedy is too strong a word, but there's many shows where I really never meet the cast. If it's a big musical, it tends to last a little longer and there's time to meet people a little bit, but it's sad to me how often that I work with kind of wonderful, talented people who I admire, and I never even talk to them. And I wish, I don't know, if I was more gregarious, I suppose I would go hang out in the green room and talk to people. But you're working hard. You're coming up with your ideas for your next show, apparently. Yeah, for the next 6. So exactly. The rest of us are slacking off and chain smoking in the green room. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching, Call Time viewers. We have another amazing guest next week, and it's always the highlight of my week doing this. So thanks so much.